Hi, my name's Miriam. My father once looked me in the eye and said, "You're a mistake. You don't belong with us." And just like that, I was uninvited from a family trip. And from the family itself. They flew across Europe. I stayed behind, eating leftover noodles in a cold kitchen. But while they snapped smiling photos in Paris, I uncovered something they never wanted me to know. The house they humiliated me in. It was mine. The $2 million my mother saved for me? He spent it. On them. Do you know what it's like to grow up begging for crumbs, only to learn you were never supposed to starve? Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this? And where from? Drop it in the comments, because I'm about to tell you how I took back what was mine and why silence was the sharpest weapon I ever had. The first thing I heard when I stepped into the living room was my stepmother Celine's voice, sharp, chirpy, cutting through the air like the edge of a well-used knife. First class, direct to Rome, then Paris, and oh, Jackson, don't forget to pack that new linen set. We'll be dining with the Lucellis at the villa. She fanned the plane tickets like they were winning lottery numbers. Jackson, lounging on the couch with one foot over the other, grinned without looking at me. Guess there's no seat for the charity case. The word stung, but I didn't flinch. I met his eyes for just a second before turning to my father. Kenneth didn't even glance up from his tablet. "We only booked for family," he said, flat, like he was reading from a script, like I wasn't standing 10 feet away. My voice came out low. "I am family." He looked at me then, and his face twisted. Not in anger, not in confusion. Disgust. "You were a mistake. A bastard. Don't ruin this trip like you ruin everything else." Silence. Except for the neighbor's sprinkler hissing across the lawn just outside the window. I glanced through the blinds and saw Mrs. Palmer standing with her hose, frozen, pretending not to hear. But she heard. Everyone always did when Kenneth raised his voice like that. I said nothing. Just turned, walked out the front door. I didn't slam it. Didn't give them the satisfaction. Outside, the sun was high, but the air felt cold against my skin. My face must have given something away because Mr. Vega across the street gave me that look. Half pity, half, "I'm staying out of it." He nodded once. I nodded back. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I got in my truck. The same one I've had since college. The seat still squeaks when I lean too hard left. I didn't even think about where I was going. My hands just knew. Left out of the driveway. Right at the school. Across the bridge. Through the back roads lined with old stone walls and overgrown fences. Litchfield Park. It was always the place I went to breathe. I parked beneath the same old maple tree that had watched me fall apart more times than I'd ever admit out loud. The bench was empty, as usual. The world kept moving, birds chirped, a dog barked somewhere far off, but it all sounded like it was underwater. That's when it hit me. How normal it all felt. Being shut out, forgotten, left behind. I leaned back and stared at the branches overhead, trying not to think about how that living room once smelled like maple syrup and bacon every Sunday morning. How Mom used to sing along to Fleetwood Mac while folding laundry. That was before the accident, before Kenneth remarried less than a year later, before the locks on the pantry changed, before my room turned into the home office. I was 18 when Mom passed. Barely old enough to vote, not old enough to stop a grown man from erasing every trace of her like she'd never existed. They didn't say it outright at first, but I knew. Celine started calling me him instead of my name. Jackson got every new thing he wanted while I got handed down bills with no explanation. And Kenneth? He just stopped seeing me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, yanking me back from the edge of memory. Unknown number. I almost let it ring out, but something in me, maybe desperation, maybe curiosity, made me answer. "Hello?" A woman's voice, calm, direct. "Reed?" "Yeah?" "It's Delia, your mother's sister." I sat up straighter. "Aunt Delia?" "It's been a long time," she said. Her tone softened. "I heard your father's going to Europe." Of course she had. Small towns had no secrets. She didn't wait for me to respond. "Good. Then you need to come see me." I blinked. "Why now?" "There's something your mother left you, and it's time you saw it." A long beat. Her voice didn't waver. She wasn't the type to talk nonsense. I could have asked a million questions. What is it? Why now? Why did she wait this long? But I didn't. Because for the first time in what felt like forever, someone was reaching for me, not away from me. "I'm in Litchfield," I said. "I'm still in Ridge Hollow. The house is the same." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I'll head out soon." When the call ended, I sat there for a few minutes, letting the silence wrap around me again. Then I stood up, walked back to the truck, and opened the door. The sun had shifted lower now, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. I climbed in and rested my hands on the steering wheel, staring into the mirror. I didn't pack anything, I muttered to myself. But what was there to pack? Half my life had already been stripped down to what could fit in a glove box. I looked at my reflection. Same face. Same eyes. But something felt different. "They always said I didn't belong," I whispered. "Maybe that's because I belonged somewhere else all along." I started the engine. The old truck rumbled awake like it had been waiting. What could she have possibly left me?" I muttered as I pulled onto the road. The tires crunched over gravel as I turned onto the narrow drive, the late afternoon sun flickering through a veil of pine trees. Delia's house sat tucked back behind a low stone wall, hugged by hydrangeas in full bloom, blue and lavender and soft pinks, like a painting that refused to fade. I parked beneath the same elm tree I remembered from years ago, the one with the crooked trunk and birdhouse hanging sideways from a rusty nail. The wind carried the faint scent of lavender and sea salt. Something about it made my chest ache. Before I could reach the porch, the front door creaked open. Delia stood there, apron still on, hands drying on a faded dish towel. Her gray-streaked curls were pinned back loosely, and the light caught the fine lines around her eyes. She didn't say anything at first, just stared. Then she breathed out, almost like she'd been holding it for years. "You look just like her." My throat tightened. She stepped forward without hesitation, wrapping me in a hug that caught me off guard. It wasn't stiff or obligatory. It was warm, real, like someone remembering who you used to be and seeing who you are now, all in one breath. I stood there in her arms, too stunned to speak. I hadn't been hugged like that in... Honestly, I couldn't remember. Not since Mom. "Come on in," she whispered, voice slightly shaking. "Let's get you some tea. You've got that road look in your eyes." Inside, the house smelled of rosemary and old wood, the kind of place where time moved slowly and nothing needed to be perfect to be loved. She led me into the kitchen, still painted the same soft green, with chipped mugs hanging above the sink. I sat down at the table while she poured 2 cups of tea. I didn't know where to start. I didn't have to. "I know why you're here," she said, sliding a cup in front of me. "And I know it's long overdue." She walked to the small hallway cabinet, pulled out a tin box wrapped in faded blue ribbon. It was worn, edges dented, the metal dulled from years of hands touching it. "She gave me this right before the cancer got bad," Delia said quietly, placing it on the table. "Told me not to open it, not even once. Said I'd know when it was time to pass it on." She ran her fingers over the ribbon. "And I think, After today, after what they did, her voice caught. It's time. I stared at it for a moment before slowly untying the ribbon. My hands moved carefully, like opening a sacred thing. Inside, a folded letter on creamy paper, written in the familiar, elegant loops of my mother's handwriting. Beneath it, a small stack of documents, yellowed at the edges. And at the bottom, an old photograph of her holding me as a baby. She looked so young, so happy. I didn't recognize that version of her. But she looked like she belonged to herself. I opened the letter. My dearest Reed, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And my heart breaks that I couldn't stay to protect you longer. But you've always been strong, stronger than even your father could ever admit. I know he might tell you that you have nothing, that there's nothing left of me or us. But that's not true. This house, our first home, it's yours. I put the deed in your name when you were just 6, and the savings, it's more than you know. I set aside $2 million in a trust. You weren't supposed to access it until your 35th birthday. I did it that way to protect it from him, from what I feared he might become once I was gone. If you're reading this before then, and things feel wrong, it's because something is. The words blurred for a second. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and kept reading. Always remember who you are, Reed. You were born from love, even if the world forgets it. I never did. I never will. Love always, Mom. I sat there for a long moment, barely breathing. Delia reached across the table and gently took the photo from the box, running her thumb along the edge. Your mom was always a few steps ahead of everyone, she murmured. My voice cracked. They told me we had nothing, that there was nothing left. And I believed them. She met my eyes. I wondered for years, the way Kenneth started spending after she passed. Vacations, renovations, that boat. It never added up. I looked down at the documents. The deed, our old house, in my name. The trust fund information, with her signature, notarized. But one paper near the bottom looked different. A legal amendment, dated just 2 years ago, and signed by me. At least it was supposed to look like that. My stomach twisted. That's not mine, I said slowly. That's his handwriting. I know how he loops his R's. He always said mine looked like a kid's. Delia's mouth went tight. I thought so too. I looked back at the letter. All those years, I whispered. Ramen for dinner, skipping insurance, using a space heater because the furnace was busted. Meanwhile, they're out on boats and wine tastings with stolen money. Delia reached over and gently squeezed my wrist. He forged your name. He used what she left you. But you're not powerless. I nodded slowly, hands curling around the edge of the table. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was fire. I'm not walking away from this, I said. Not again. She stood up and walked over to a small safe hidden behind a bookshelf, pulled out a folder. Here, she said, handing it to me. Copies, just in case. I figured one day you'd come. I tucked the letter and papers into the folder, heart pounding. Then I looked up at her. If he forged my name, I'm taking everything back. Delia quietly refilled our teacups as I sat there, fingers pressed against the folder like it was the only thing keeping me from flying apart. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at the papers, the signature that was supposed to be mine but wasn't. Not the way I wrote it, not the way I ever had. Delia finally spoke. If he really did forge your name to access that trust, her voice trailed off, heavy with implications, then we need to make sure, without a doubt. We moved to the dining table where the light was better. I laid out the documents she'd kept, the trust forms, the withdrawal slips, the fake amendment from 2 years ago. And beside it, I placed my old driver's license, still in my wallet from when I lived in Houston, back when I thought life was just about surviving day to day. Delia pulled a magnifying glass from the drawer. "Here," she said, handing it to me. "Look closely at the loops on the R's in your name." I leaned in. She was right. The R's on the trust withdrawal form curled up at the end, sharp and neat. Precise, controlled. Mine always sloped lazily, a little uneven, especially when I was tired. I used to get teased about it. Kenneth would call it childish. That's when it clicked. "He forged it," I said. No hesitation, no wavering, just fact. "He emptied the trust before I even turned 30. Delia's face was unreadable, but her hands stilled on the table. She slowly sat down across from me. "He waited for her to die," I muttered, more to myself than anyone. He knew I wouldn't ask questions. He knew I'd assume I failed on my own. A flicker of memory flashed through me, one I hadn't thought about in years. "My 23rd birthday," I whispered. "He shoved a bunch of papers at me, said they were insurance forms. I'd just come back from working a double shift at the warehouse. I was exhausted. I didn't even read them." Delia's hand went to her mouth. I looked up. "He tricked me into giving him power of attorney, didn't he?" She didn't speak for a second, then nodded slowly. "If that's what was in those papers, then yes." I stood and started pacing. The kitchen felt suddenly too small, like the walls were pressing in. "He knew exactly what he was doing," I said. "He looked me in the eye that night and told me to trust him. I was just trying to keep up with bills, with school, with 2 part-time jobs. I didn't have time to question." Delia stood too, firm now. "We need someone who knows how to read these properly. I've got a friend, Nancy Fields. She's a retired notary, still keeps her license up. Been doing it for 40 years. She's sharp as a tack and doesn't tolerate lies." Within an hour, we were driving downtown in Delia's aging Subaru, the box of documents secured in my lap. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the road. I watched them pass by like ghosts, bits of a life I thought I understood. Nancy's office was tucked between a dental practice and a yarn shop. Small, quiet. When we walked in, she was sipping coffee at her desk, reading a book with glasses perched on her nose. "Delia," she smiled, standing. "And this must be Reed." She gave me a firm handshake. "You've got your mama's eyes." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I just nodded and took a seat. Delia got straight to it, laying out the paperwork. Nancy skimmed through them, her brow tightening. "This one right here," she said, tapping the withdrawal form. "Claims it was signed and notarized in 2014. She looked at me. "Were you in town that day?" I pulled out my phone. Old photos. I'd uploaded everything to the cloud years ago, mostly to back it up in case my phone died during a shift. I scrolled until I hit the right month. There it was. July 18th, 2014. A selfie in front of the Houston skyline. I'd been at a friend's birthday. "I wasn't even in the same city," I said, holding it up. Nancy leaned in, studying the metadata. "That's enough to raise serious questions. And whoever notarized this wasn't me. And this stamp?" She pointed to the bottom corner. "That's an outdated seal. It expired in 2012. She leaned back, folded her hands. "You may have a real fraud case here, Reed." That word hit different when it came from someone with authority. Fraud. Not misunderstanding. Not a mistake. Fraud. Nancy helped us make copies of everything. She printed my selfie with timestamp data. She even wrote a summary of her initial review and signed it. We walked back to the car in silence. The folder felt heavier now. Back at Delia's house, I dropped into the couch like someone had unplugged me. "He looked me in the eye," I said quietly, staring at the ceiling. "He handed me bills paid with my own money and told me I should be grateful. Said, 'Some people don't even get that much.'" Delia sat beside me, soft but steady. "I thought I was broke because I wasn't good enough," I said. "Because I didn't work hard enough. That's what he made me believe." that I was the failure. She took my hand, and for a while we just sat like that. Then she said something that made me sit up. I know a lawyer. Name's Henry Castor. He handled my probate case when my brother passed. He's not flashy, but he's honest, smart, kind. The kind who fights for people like you. I nodded slowly. I don't want revenge, I said. Not yet. I want the truth. I want every piece of it, no matter how ugly. Because he didn't just steal money. He stole years. Delia stood and walked toward the kitchen. Good, she said over her shoulder, because this isn't about getting even. It's about making it right. I followed her in, took the folder back into my hands. There was a fire in my chest now, not rage, not grief, clarity. He built a life on that money, I said, more to myself than to her. The vacations, the cars, the boat, he told everyone he earned it. Delia turned to look at me. I looked down at the letter again, at my mother's careful handwriting, her trust in a future she wouldn't live to see. If he used my money to build his new life, I whispered, jaw tight. I'm tearing it down piece by piece. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. After Delia went to bed, I sat in the living room for hours, the folder still in my lap. It felt heavier than paper, like it held the weight of the last 10 years. The lies, the silence, the constant pressure to accept crumbs and call it love. By morning, I knew I had to go back. Not to stay, just to see. I needed to know what my money had bought, what kind of life they were living now that I'd been cut out of it completely. So, I drove. 3 hours north, back toward the suburb outside Boston where I grew up. The highway looked the same, but everything else felt different. Colder, unfamiliar, like I was heading into someone else's story. When I turned onto the street, I hadn't driven in years. My stomach clenched. There it was, the house I'd spent half my life in. But now it looked nothing like the place I remembered. The siding was new, stone and gray with white trim, fancy, expensive. The porch was wide and wrapped around the front, with rocking chairs and potted flowers like something out of a magazine. The lawn was perfect, not a single brown patch. Even the mailbox had changed, from the dented black one I used to tape shut, to a sleek copper box with their last name carved into it. And there was a security gate now, a full metal arch with keypad entry. I laughed under my breath. I used to sleep in that basement, I whispered, with a towel for a blanket. I parked a block away. No one would recognize the car. I was sure of that. I sat there for a while, just watching. Then, out of habit or maybe desperation, I opened my phone and pulled up Facebook. His new wife's profile was wide open. She must have assumed no one had a reason to look. Or maybe she just didn't care. The first photo I saw was from a cruise, sparkling ocean behind them, her lips ducked into a pout, Kenneth in sunglasses. Her caption said, "Best husband in the world." Surprise vacation to Bermuda. #grateful. Spoiled. I clicked through. A Mercedes, parked right there in front of the same driveway where I used to beg for bus fare. Caption. He said I deserved it. #blessed wife. Then the one that hit me hardest. Austin. A boy of maybe 10, smiling in front of the garage, holding a new guitar. He wore a blazer, hair styled. His braces gleamed like polished silver. Austin got braces, tutors, music lessons, I muttered, scrolling. I got silence. I'd forgotten how much that silence had hurt. The next stop was unplanned. I didn't even realize I was turning until I saw the sign for Rosefield Academy, the private school a few miles from the neighborhood. I used to pass it on the city bus, my face pressed against the window. Sure enough, I spotted Austin walking with a group of kids wearing the school's uniform, polished shoes, tie, backpack that probably cost more than what I made in a week back then. I stayed in the car, gripping the wheel. My chest felt tight. I remembered once I was 13, and I asked Kenneth if I could take an after-school art class at the community center. He looked up from his beer and said, "If you want extras, get a job." I stared at the steering wheel until my vision blurred. Delia called just then. I cleared my throat before answering. "You okay?" she asked gently. "Still breathing," I said. "You think that lawyer friend of yours would take a call from us today?" "Already texted him," she said. "He can see you tomorrow. But first, we've got one more place to stop." Delia met me outside a real estate office downtown, one she'd done business with before. She told the woman at the front desk we needed to review some public property records. Nothing out of the ordinary. She walked me through how to pull tax data and ownership filings. We used the address of the house and ran the search. The renovations started less than 6 months after my trust had been emptied. Permits for the porch, stonework, even the pool. A second mortgage taken out, likely secured with the trust money to cover the rest. Then came the purchase of the Mercedes. Financed, but the down payment was traced back to a bank account that matched the same number from the withdrawal slip Nancy had reviewed. Next were the tuition payments. Lump sums, 3 in total, made out directly to Rosefield Academy. Again, all within 8 months of the last withdrawal from my mother's trust. "They built this fake life with my mother's legacy," I said softly, the words catching in my throat. Delia didn't flinch. She rested her hand on mine. "Then it's time you reclaim it. Not with rage, but with proof." By late afternoon, I was parked outside the house again. This time I wasn't scrolling. I was watching. The back gate opened, and Austin came running out, his arms flailing with joy. He leapt into the pool with a splash, laughter echoing over the fence. Kenneth followed behind, drink in hand, watching with that smug look he always wore when he thought no one was watching him. His wife joined him moments later, draping an arm around his waist like a reward. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. But I didn't move. I didn't honk. Didn't shout. Just breathed. "I won't break their windows," I said quietly. "I'll break their lies." Because I saw now. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the story, the one they told about themselves to everyone. About how Kenneth had rebuilt his life after a tragic loss, how he'd started fresh, been blessed with love again, and deserved happiness. All lies, all bought with what was meant to be my future. And now I had a paper trail, a signature analysis, a timeline, a motive, a name, mine, used without permission. The storm hadn't even begun yet, but it would. Later that evening, back at Delia's, I sat on the porch while the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass. She brought out 2 glasses of iced tea, handed one to me. I took a long sip, then turned to her. "Let's meet your lawyer," I said. "I want this all on paper." She smiled, but it wasn't sweet. It was solid, like stone, like justice beginning to take form. Delia made the call before we even left the porch. By the time we pulled into the brick-lined streets of Cambridge, the sky was already shifting into that pale winter gray, like the day couldn't decide whether to hold on or fold early. The office was tucked in a historic row building near Harvard Square, clean, unassuming, and quiet in that clinical way that makes you sit straighter. Delia gave my shoulder a small squeeze before we walked in. Inside, a woman with salt and pepper hair and a navy pantsuit greeted us with a firm but kind expression. "Mr. Reed, I'm Miriam Costas. Let's sit." Her office smelled like lemon polish and legal books. There was no fluff, no family photos, just documents stacked neatly on her desk and a single orchid near the window that looked like it hadn't bloomed in years. Miriam got right to it. Delia shared a few details. "I pulled your mother's trust filings and cross-referenced them with the county's withdrawal logs and probate notes." She adjusted her glasses and opened a thin folder. There are concerning patterns. I nodded slowly. I figured. She flipped the first document toward me. This is a signed power of attorney form. Dated 2 weeks after your 23rd birthday. I leaned closer. My name was there. My signature, too. Or at least it looked like mine. That's impossible, I said quietly. I don't remember signing this. Delia didn't say a word, just sat still beside me, her hands folded in her lap. Miriam's tone stayed even. Do you remember Kenneth asking you to sign anything back then? I closed my eyes. And suddenly, I did. It was that night in the apartment. I'd just moved in with him after Mom passed. He poured me a whiskey, cheap, harsh, and called it a cheers to adulthood. I remember him putting papers in front of me, saying, just standard stuff. I'm adding you to the family health plan. You'll need to sign these. I'd laughed. Why is it 20 pages? Because insurance is boring, he'd said, and I signed, just like that. I thought it was for health insurance, I whispered now. He told me it was just so I'd be on the plan. Miriam's face didn't move, but something in her eyes softened. He used that POA to gain full access to your mother's trust. From that point on, he could move funds, take loans, and authorize disbursements without needing your involvement. My throat felt dry. He waited until she was gone, then got me drunk, and slid this under the radar. It appears that way. She pulled another document from the folder. This one is worse, she said. It was a waiver. One I had allegedly signed, stating I voluntarily decline any future claim to assets derived from the estate of Helen Reed. I stared at the paper. That's not my signature, I said immediately. Miriam nodded. I compared it to a verified sample from your college financial aid forms. The slant is wrong. The baseline is shaky. And look at the notary seal, she continued. This was stamped in Worcester County. But records show you were living in Somerville at the time. Did you ever travel out that way? No, I said. Not once. Not for anything. Delia leaned forward. So what does that mean? Miriam pressed her fingertips together. It means you may have grounds to argue fraud. He presented you with misleading documents, likely under false pretenses, and used your trust, legally, but manipulatively, and if we can show the waiver was forged, that opens a criminal window. I stood up and walked to the window. The sky had turned completely overcast now. A few drops of rain tapped at the glass like they were waiting for permission to fall harder. I was 23, I said. I'd just buried my mother. I didn't have anyone. He knew that. He knew exactly how to get me to shut up and sign whatever he needed. I turned back around. And he did it, calmly, like he'd planned it from the start. Miriam gave a slow nod. Predators rarely strike without preparation. I crossed my arms. He used my grief against me. He wore my mother's death like a door pass into my future. And I let him in. Delia stood now, too. You didn't let him in. He broke in. Don't confuse trust with consent. Miriam's tone sharpened. I'm going to file a request for full document authentication. If we can prove the signature was forged or signed under duress, we have a shot at voiding the waiver. And if not, I asked, then we lean on the ethics of disclosure. You were never told what you were signing. That's coercion. And courts take that seriously. I breathed slowly. Everything in me wanted to scream, not out of rage, but out of shame. Shame that I'd been so naive, so desperate to belong. I gave away something that didn't even belong to me. It belonged to the woman who gave me everything and died trusting someone else to honor it. Instead, they buried it in spa weekends and patio stone. Miriam packed the papers back into the folder. I'll call you in 2 days. We stepped outside. It was starting to drizzle, the kind that chills your neck before you even feel it hit your skin. Delia walked beside me in silence for a block. Then she asked, "Are you sure this isn't about revenge?" I kept walking, slow and steady. "It's not," I said. "It's about dignity." I looked straight ahead, not stopping. He built a story where I was the charity case, the mistake, the burden who got cut out for being unstable, and I believed it for years. Delia didn't say anything, just kept pace beside me. I kept going. But that story only worked because I stayed quiet, because I didn't question it, because I thought maybe I deserved it. I stopped at the corner and looked back at her. Well, I'm done being quiet. I'm not screaming. I'm documenting. She gave me a small smile. Good. When we got back to her car, I sat down and texted Miriam one line. "I'm ready. Let's file. I want the court to see everything." By the time I stepped through the courthouse doors, my palms were already damp. The suit I had on hadn't seen daylight since a distant cousin's wedding 8 years ago. It fit, like it remembered my old self more than it did the one standing there now. One that had seen too much, lost too much, and learned just enough not to walk away this time. Delia parked just a block down, and when we met inside, she didn't offer pep talks or hugs, just a firm nod. That was her way of saying, "You've got this." And honestly, I needed that more than 1,000 words. Miriam was already waiting in the hallway outside courtroom 3C, a neat stack of folders in one arm and her reading glasses perched low on her nose. Calm, controlled, deadly in the way only a woman with facts could be. She glanced over her files, then at me. "We don't need emotion today," she murmured. "We need documentation and clarity. You sit still. I'll do the cutting." "I'm not looking for drama," I replied. "I just want it all on record." The doors opened. Courtroom 3C wasn't packed, just a handful of quiet spectators, 2 paralegals, and a bailiff who looked bored enough to doze off if not for the caffeine in his cup. Then I saw him, Kenneth, sitting on the opposite bench, straight-backed, in a charcoal suit probably paid for with my mother's money. His new wife beside him, hair iron flat and lips pursed. And Austin, quiet, eyes darting, like he wasn't quite sure why he was even here. Kenneth didn't look at me, not fully, but there was that twitch of his lip, that smug half-smile. I'd seen it 1,000 times growing up, right before he tore someone down in front of a room just to feel taller. I sat without a word. The judge entered, older and sharp-eyed, with a no-nonsense presence that warned everyone to keep their stories straight. Miriam stood first. She didn't pace or gesture dramatically like in movies. She just spoke, evenly, clearly, like someone who wasn't trying to win, just trying to reveal, "Your Honor, we are here today not out of anger, but out of discrepancy," she began. "My client, Reed Helen Marshall, was named as the sole beneficiary of her mother's estate. What followed in the months after Helen's death was, at best, a series of misleading transactions. At worst, a calculated breach of trust." She laid out the timeline, the power of attorney, the forged waiver, the disbursements that followed, the renovation bills. The out-of-state withdrawals, 3 documents were placed into evidence. Then she paused, quietly slipped a phone onto the podium. "I'd like to play an audio recording, acquired legally from a voicemail left by the respondent to a third-party individual." Kenneth's lawyer shifted in his seat. The room fell still. Then, "I just moved the last chunk into the account before the kid wises up. We're good. Tell Austin to keep his mouth shut." Silence. No rustling. No coughing. Just a long, stunned breath from the back row. Kenneth's wife blinked twice, face suddenly pale. Austin stared straight at the table. The judge looked up slowly, then down at the transcript provided. Kenneth leaned back, his face unreadable. When it was his lawyer's turn, he went with the usual script. "There's been confusion. These are personal family disagreements, not uncommon in inheritance cases. The waiver, while perhaps hasty, was not executed with malice." Then Kenneth took the stand. I watched as he adjusted his tie like he had something important to say. I loved Helen, he began. She trusted me to oversee her estate responsibly. Reed was grieving. He wasn't in a mental state to manage complex finances. I made judgment calls, maybe imperfect ones, but never with bad intent. Miriam stood. Mr. Marshall, are you suggesting your son was mentally unfit to understand documents he signed? I didn't say unfit. I said fragile. But he was fit enough for you to hand him full power of attorney, correct? That was just a formality. And yet you used that formality to liquidate over 80% of the estate. Kenneth's jaw tightened. It was for the family. For stability. For spa weekends, lake trips, new landscaping. He hesitated. You're twisting this. No, Mr. Marshall, Miriam said, voice firm but steady. I'm quoting your own words. Would you like to hear them again? Kenneth glanced at the judge. It was a mistake, he said finally. And Miriam paused. The signature on the waiver, did Reed sign that in your presence? Kenneth blinked. Yes. And was it notarized? Yes, at a bank in Worcester. Reed has testified he never traveled to Worcester that year. Kenneth shrugged. Maybe he forgot. The judge leaned forward now, his voice sharper. You're saying the man you deemed fragile and incapable of financial understanding voluntarily signed away a 7-figure inheritance in your presence, then promptly forgot about it? Kenneth looked trapped. Not cornered, trapped, like someone just realized the exit door locked behind them. He glanced toward Austin, who wouldn't meet his eyes, then toward his wife, whose mouth was pressed into a line so tight it looked carved from stone. I did what I thought was right, Kenneth finally muttered. He didn't deserve all of it. The courtroom didn't gasp this time. It was quiet. But that silence? It was louder than any outburst. The judge nodded. We'll recess for review. Ms. Costas, thank you. We'll reconvene once documentation has been formally authenticated. Kenneth didn't look at me as he stepped off the stand. But he didn't smirk either. As we walked out into the hallway, Delia exhaled beside me. You didn't even flinch, she said quietly. There was nothing left to flinch at, I replied. She looked sideways at me. You didn't yell. You didn't curse. You didn't even raise your voice. I shrugged, steady. I didn't need to. The facts spoke louder than I ever could. Delia gave a faint smile. Truth's got teeth when you finally let it out. Outside, the sky was still gray, but the rain had stopped. We walked to the curb, and as I reached for my phone to text Miriam a thank you, a new message appeared. Unknown number. Hey, I think we need to talk. I saw what happened. I stared at it for a second. Then I saved the number. The message had been sitting on my phone for 2 days before I finally replied. Hey, I think we need to talk. I saw what happened. I stared at it every night like it might morph into something else if I waited long enough. But it didn't. It just stayed there, silent, steady, waiting. The number wasn't saved, but I didn't need it to be. I knew who it was. So on a crisp fall morning, I walked into a small cafe tucked between a consignment shop and an old bookstore in a quiet Boston neighborhood. The kind of place with mismatched chairs and pumpkin bread wrapped in wax paper at the counter. I picked the corner table, facing the window. I needed space, and I needed an exit if things went sideways. The waitress came by twice before I finally ordered. Just a black coffee. I didn't want anything to distract me from whatever was about to happen. It was almost 20 minutes before I saw him. Austin. He looked smaller. Not physically, but something about his shoulders, the way he carried himself. No flashy jacket, no cocky grin. Just jeans, a gray hoodie, and eyes that flicked toward me like he wasn't sure I'd still be here. He walked in alone. When he reached the table, he didn't sit right away. Just nodded. Hey, I nodded back. You're late. Yeah, he mumbled. Had to walk around the block a few times first. I gestured to the chair across from me. He slid into it and stared at the menu without reading it. When the waitress came back, he asked for a chamomile tea. That caught me off guard. Didn't peg you for tea. He shrugged. Didn't feel like coffee. I've had enough of staying wired and pretending I'm fine. I leaned back. So, why are we here? He looked up slowly. I didn't come to defend anyone. Good, because I don't think there's much left worth defending. Austin nodded, took a breath, then said, I saw the court stuff. Not just what you said, but how you held it together. You didn't yell. You didn't break. You just stood there, like a wall. That wasn't strength, I said. That was practice. He looked down, fingers tapping the rim of his cup. I found the bank records when I was 19, he said, voice low. Dad was out, and I needed some tax forms. They were in the wrong drawer, and that's when I saw it. The transfer slips, the check stubs. All of it. I didn't say anything. My hands tightened around the cup. I asked him about it, Austin continued. He said it was complicated, that Mom left everything in chaos, and you didn't want anything, that it was just cleaning things up. And you believed him? For a while. He gave a bitter laugh. I was a stupid kid. I wanted to believe the story where I wasn't living off someone else's future. My jaw clenched. College tuition, he said. Our family trip to Utah. The pool renovations. That weird boat party Dad threw 2 summers ago. All of it. That money came from you. From what Grandma left you. I didn't speak. Just let the ache settle where it wanted. I didn't know how to face you, he whispered. And then we all just acted like it was normal. You'd show up and we'd make small talk. You'd bring a pie to Thanksgiving. You'd laugh when Dad made jokes. And I'd sit there, knowing everything. Why now? I asked. Austin's eyes lifted, steady now. Because in court, I didn't see the guy they always described. I didn't see some angry, fragile man clinging to the past. I saw someone they'd been lying about. I saw the truth, and it made me sick. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photo. I kept this, he said, sliding it across the table. It was a picture of me and my mother, taken some time before she passed. We were at the lake. She had her arm around my shoulder, and we were both laughing. You could see it in our eyes. Real joy. She used to pick me up from school, Austin said softly. We'd stop for ice cream. She always told me, you're lucky to have Reed as your brother. He's got the biggest heart in the whole family. My throat tightened. She said that? He nodded. And she wrote it too, in a journal. I have it. She used to jot little things down, quotes, stuff she overheard, memories. She wrote a whole page about you once. Said you were her heart. I had to look away. The cafe windows were fogging up from the heat inside, but outside, the trees were gold and orange and beautiful. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it didn't go anywhere. I thought you were Dad's shadow, I said after a long moment. Always defending him, always keeping your head down. I was, he admitted. Sometimes I still am. But I don't want to be. Not anymore. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that wasn't tense, just full. He broke it first. If you ever need someone to testify about what I found, the papers, the deposits, I'll do it. No hesitation. I shook my head. I'm not looking for revenge. Then what? I looked him dead in the eyes. I'm not letting him rewrite her memory. That's what this is about. He can take money. He can twist words. But he doesn't get to erase what she left behind. Austin looked down at the table, then back at me. I think she'd be proud of you. I let that hang in the air. I didn't agree, didn't disagree. Some wounds don't close with words, even kind ones. When the check came, I paid it. We stood. No handshake, no hug. But he said, I'm around, okay? If you ever want to talk, or not talk, just whatever. I nodded. I'll keep that in mind. We stepped outside. The wind had picked up. Leaves scattered across the sidewalk like they couldn't decide where to go. Austin walked left. I walked right. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel empty. After the door closed behind Austin and the soft jingle of the cafe bell faded from my memory, I returned home carrying more than just that folded photograph. I carried a weight I hadn't realized I'd been craving: validation. The sky had gone dark by the time I got back to my apartment. Rain drizzled faintly, barely audible over the muffled hum of traffic outside. Inside, it was quiet. Just the low buzz of my fridge and the occasional creak of old floorboards settling under the cooling air. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my keys in the ceramic dish by the door, and set the journal Austin had handed me on the small coffee table. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it, the way you might stare at a box marked fragile without knowing what's inside. Eventually, I poured myself a glass of water, turned off the kitchen light, and sat down on the worn sofa. The cushions gave way like they always did, familiar and tired. I pulled a blanket across my lap, rested the journal there, and slowly, carefully opened the front cover. A note was taped inside, folded in half. I could tell it wasn't Austin's handwriting. It read, "For Reed, if they ever try to erase you, remember, you were everything to me." My chest tightened before I even got to the first page. I sat back, blinking hard. Then I turned to the first entry. They said 6 months, maybe less. But my boy, you're going to outlive them all. Her handwriting was steady, strong, and unmistakably hers. I could almost hear her voice as I read. Not how it sounded when she was sick, but the way it rang when she was laughing while washing dishes or humming to the radio while driving me to school. My fingers shook a little as I turned the page. She had started the journal right after her diagnosis. No headers, no dates, just entries, like breadcrumbs she'd left behind in case I ever needed to find my way back to her. Kenneth doesn't see you, but I do. I see the way you protect your sister, the way you hide your hunger so others can eat. You think I don't notice, but I do. I always have. I had to set the book down. My throat was dry, but no water in the world could have helped that burn. She'd seen it. All the quiet sacrifices, the leftovers I pretended to be full for, the nights I'd give my blanket to Rami because she'd cry if her toes were cold. I'd been told my whole life that I was dramatic, sensitive. Too much. But she'd seen me. I picked the journal back up, desperate now, hungry in a different way. A few entries in, I read something that made me sit upright. I added Reed's name to the trust today. Quietly. Kenneth won't know. Not yet. He'd contest it, try to twist it. But I have copies in the safety deposit box, in the envelope marked for Miriam. I froze. Miriam. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since the funeral. Not since she told me she wasn't allowed to share certain details unless Kenneth approved it. I'd written her off, but now I wasn't so sure I should have. My mother had planned for this. Not just hoped, not just guessed, planned. There were more entries like that, strategies, backups, layers. She had met with a lawyer on her own, rewritten her will, transferred titles. She'd moved accounts into my name months before the cancer got bad. If he tries to contest it, there are backup papers. If he lies, the numbers will expose him. I'm doing this so he can't take from you what's already yours. I had to stop again. I stared out the rain-slicked window, the city lights blurring behind the droplets. She'd known. All this time, I thought I was the only one keeping track of the cracks in this family. But she had seen every fault line and was reinforcing them behind the scenes. When I turned the page, something slipped out. A yellowed piece of paper, folded in thirds, held with a rusty paperclip. It was a sketch, a floor plan, the old house. My room was marked with a red heart. In the margins, she had written, "Your room. That's why I bought the house. I wanted you to feel safe. That window seat? I made them build it, even when Kenneth said it wasn't worth the cost. I knew you'd need a place to cry where no one would see." I pressed the paper to my chest. I remembered that window, the way the morning light would pour in, how I used to sit there, curled up, trying to be invisible. I thought I had found it by accident, but she had given it to me. She had given me safety when no one else thought I deserved it. I turned to the last page. Her handwriting had changed. It was shakier, more space between the lines, but it was still hers. "They may try to write you out, but you're already written in, my bones, my breath, my love. One day you'll see this and know you were never a burden. You were the reason I fought to live one more day." I didn't cry right away. It started as a pressure in my chest. Then it crept up my throat and filled my ears. And then, suddenly, I was sobbing. Not the kind of crying that you do when you're sad. No, this was different. This was the kind of cry that comes when someone finally tells you, "I saw you. I loved you. I never forgot you." I held that journal like it was her, like if I gripped it tightly enough, she'd materialize and pull me into her arms. I wept until my body was tired, until the rain outside stopped, and all that was left was the soft ticking of the wall clock. When I finally pulled myself together, I sat in silence for a long time, the journal still in my lap. I traced the edge of the last page with my thumb, letting her words anchor me. They tried to erase me. They tried to write a story where I was nothing, where I was unwanted, unworthy. But she had written another story. Quietly, carefully, in her own hand. And that story was still here, still standing, still mine. I picked up my phone. There was one person who might know where those backup papers were. I scrolled to her name, hovered for a second. Then I pressed call. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was calm but surprised. "Reed?" I didn't waste time. The phone was warm in my hand as I pressed it to my ear. "Miriam," I said, my voice calm. "It's time to finish this. I want to take the stand." She didn't ask questions. Didn't hesitate. Just answered, "I'll be there." The morning air carried a coolness that crept through the courthouse steps, the kind of morning that felt like a new beginning, or maybe a reckoning. The stone walls of the probate court echoed with quiet footsteps as I walked inside, dressed not for war but for truth. The courtroom itself wasn't grand. It was almost plain, lined with wooden pews and tall windows that let in pale sunlight. But it had the one thing I needed: silence. That heavy kind of silence that hangs before something changes. Kenneth sat across the aisle, arms crossed, jaw tight, like a man who'd rehearsed arrogance so long it became muscle memory. His new attorney, another one, sat beside him, already sweating. Miriam sat 2 rows behind me. When I turned to look at her, she gave me the smallest nod, steady, clear, like a lighthouse in fog. The bailiff called my name. I stood, my shoes sounding firm on the tile floor. No nerves. Not anymore. I had spent years afraid of my own voice, but now I knew what needed to be said, and why. I took my seat at the witness box. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, looked over her glasses. "Mr. Reed Marin, you're here to speak to matters concerning the Marin Trust and its administration. Proceed." Before Kenneth could open his mouth, I turned to him, not angry, not smug, just steady. he sneered. Finally found your voice? He muttered. I tilted my head. No. I found the truth, and it's louder than you. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a slim manila folder. Nothing fancy, just paper with weight. I placed it on the table in front of the court. This, I began, is a notarized letter from my mother's attorney, dated 6 weeks before her death. It confirms her intention that the trust, every cent of it, was to remain under my control after her passing. I opened the folder slowly. The courtroom stayed silent. These are bank statements, Your Honor, I continued. Time-stamped, tracked. They show withdrawals, large ones, made by Kenneth Marin, right after my mother entered hospice. Tens of thousands here, 100,000 there. Kenneth shifted in his seat. I didn't look at him. And this, I said, sliding out the last document, is the forensic report. I hired a third-party accountant. They traced every dollar, vacations, college tuition, renovations to Kenneth's house, all pulled from a trust that wasn't his. A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. Kenneth's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but I wasn't done. I reached down and lifted something else from my bag. My mother's journal. The law can handle the financial side, I said, looking directly at the judge. But this is about something deeper. I opened the journal gently, like I'd done a dozen times in the last month, pages soft with time, ink still bold. I'd like to read a letter my mother wrote, I said, my voice steady. The judge nodded. Proceed. I began. To my son. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But remember, I never left you. I built this for you, with every ounce of strength I had left. You are my legacy, not the money, not the name. You. For a beat, no one moved. Even the court reporter paused mid-keystroke. I heard the sound of someone swallowing. Kenneth turned pale. She knew, I said quietly. She knew what he'd try to do. Kenneth slammed his hand on the table. That doesn't prove anything. She was sick. She was delusional. But before the judge could respond, Miriam stood. Her voice didn't rise. It cut clean. I spoke with her. I sat with her the week before she passed. She was lucid, clearer than I've ever been. She knew what she wanted. And she was stronger than you ever were. Kenneth opened his mouth again, but the judge's gavel cracked sharply. Mr. Marin, she said firmly, one more outburst and you'll be removed. Silence returned. The judge looked through the documents once more, then leaned back in her chair. She took a moment before speaking. The court finds that the trust, as intended by the late Claire Marin, was to be managed and held by Reed Marin. Kenneth Marin is found to have misappropriated in excess of $2 million. Restitution will be required. The Marin residence is to be returned to Reed Marin immediately. I didn't move. Not right away. Kenneth stood frozen, as if the floor might open beneath him. But me? I stood taller. There was no applause, no shouting, just a quiet shift in the room. A rebalancing. Outside, the press buzzed with cameras and questions. I walked past them. I didn't owe anyone a performance. Austin appeared from the sidewalk, falling into step beside me. You okay? He asked, voice low. I exhaled. I'm not angry anymore. We reached the edge of the parking lot. I looked up at the sky, soft gray clouds breaking open for a touch of sun. I'm just free. Later that day, I returned alone to the house. My house. It was quiet now. Still, I didn't wander the rooms. I went straight to mine, the one I'd grown up in. The walls still held the faint scent of lavender and wood polish. A childhood frozen in time. I walked to the window ledge, opened the journal one last time, and placed it down. The breeze coming through the screen ruffled the final page. It fluttered gently, then stilled, like it had finally found peace. Do you know what it's like to be written out of your own story, and then handed back the pen?